Steve McQueen is always remembered by the public with the image of a cool figure, dark sunglasses, and a rebellious pose on a motorcycle. But behind that dazzling light was a man who was difficult, explosive, and obsessed with winning. Even in real life, few would expect that McQueen once kept a blacklist of 8 male stars he bore grudges against until the end of his life. Among them was someone who openly accused McQueen of stealing tricks to grab the spotlight, another whom he considered a tyrant on set, and even a supporting actor. McQueen despised simply because he thought the man was not worthy of sharing the same frame. Who were the faces he hated? Stay until the end of the video, because the last name will shock you, as it turns out to be Hollywood's very own moral gentleman. Behind the sunglasses and the cool demeanor, Steve McQueen, the king of cool, was in truth a man notorious for his temper, envy, and vindictiveness taken to extremes. McQueen built both his career and persona on a fragile ego and the fear of being overshadowed. In his world, Hollywood had no friends, only rivals to be defeated at any cost. He would never accept having his name appear beneath anyone else's. At the slightest feeling of being upstaged, McQueen would find a way to strike back and turn a minor quarrel into a lifelong grudge. Because of this ruthless nature, it is no surprise that most people on his hate list were A-list stars. And now let's begin with the first name. A screen icon McQueen despised most deeply throughout his career. 1. Marlon Brando. I'd rather die than share the same frame. Hollywood was dazzling with countless legends, but if you had to pick 2 men who made the whole world bow, they were Steve McQueen and Marlon Brando. The world dreamed of seeing them side by side, but the grim truth was they hated each other so much they wanted to erase the other from Hollywood. It all began with the fiery personalities of both men. Brando was seen as a tyrant who scorned rules. He manipulated everything like a game, ignoring scripts, improvising deliberately, arriving late, and often showing up drunk. Yet, no matter what he did, directors looked the other way because of his enormous influence in Hollywood. By contrast, McQueen grew up poor. Abandoned as a child, he clawed his way to the top through grit and sheer will. However, McQueen was haunted by one truth: he lacked Brando's depth in acting. That contrast created a gulf. McQueen despised Brando's chaos, but was consumed with jealousy over Brando's brilliance. And so he would rather sabotage his own career than share the stage with the man he considered his enemy. In the 60s and 70s, some studios tried to bring them together. McQueen flatly refused. He said, "I'd rather die than be in the same frame with that guy." Why? Because McQueen knew if he appeared next to Brando, he'd be swallowed alive. To Brando, McQueen was nothing more than a pretty boy who could ride a motorcycle. On the towering inferno, the studio considered casting Marlon Brando. McQueen threatened the director, "If Brando shows up, I'm walking." On Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola invited McQueen to play the captain. But when he learned Brando was cast as the colonel, McQueen screamed over the phone, "Never tell him to get the hell out," and hung up, refusing the role. At a Hollywood fundraiser, McQueen was sipping whiskey when Brando strutted in, puffing a cigar. McQueen didn't say a word. He smashed his glass to the floor and stormed out, leaving the crowd stunned. They hated each other so much there isn't a single photo of them together. On his deathbed, McQueen still clenched his teeth and uttered Brando's name with hatred. "He's a monster." Brando, old and worn, mocked in return, McQueen. Just a Hollywood puppet dressed as a hero. The feud with Marlon Brando showed just how extreme McQueen could be when his ego was challenged. But if Brando was the man he refused to ever face, another actor made him so resentful he demanded changes to the script itself. 2. Paul Newman, The Battle Over Dialogue. Paul Newman was celebrated as the symbol of perfection, a handsome gentleman with extraordinary acting skills. Off-screen, he was the ideal role model, a faithful husband, devoted father, and revered philanthropist. But it was exactly this spotless, virtuous man image that made Steve McQueen burn with envy. When they co-starred in the towering Inferno 1974, the animosity between McQueen and Newman was obvious. McQueen threw the script across the room when he discovered Newman had more lines. He made an outrageous demand to the director rewrite the script so his dialogue count matched Newman's. But the climax of the rivalry was the promotional poster. McQueen delivered an ultimatum: his name had to be exactly level with Newman's or he would quit. The studio had to invent an unprecedented solution. They split the poster, placing McQueen's name on the left, Newman's on the right, perfectly balanced down to the pixel to appease the touchy king of cool. McQueen swore never again to appear in a film with Newman. But the bitterness went deeper. McQueen often sneered that Newman was a phony, claiming Newman played the role of a gentleman even off-screen. What enraged McQueen even more was Newman's fairy tale marriage. While McQueen was drowning in scandals, he had to watch Newman embrace his wife lovingly and be hailed as one of the greatest men of the century. The open hostility peaked at an awards ceremony where McQueen refused to shake Newman's hand simply because the host had introduced Newman as Hollywood's #1 leading man and placed McQueen second. Their rivalry even spilled onto the racetrack. Both were renowned drivers, but the public labeled them differently. Paul Newman was honored as the gentleman of speed, called by the press the only movie star respected in racing. McQueen, meanwhile, was branded an adrenaline junkie, remembered merely as a thrill seeker. That contrast made McQueen feel constantly underestimated, and Newman, though rarely confrontational, remained an unshakable thorn in his side until the very end. Jealousy of Newman turned into a lifelong obsession, with one contemporary accusing McQueen of being a thief who stole moments, turning their relationship into a battle as bitter as it was relentless. 3. James Garner, the man who accused McQueen of stealing and playing dirty. The feud between James Garner and Steve McQueen was one of Hollywood's most enduring and acrid, beginning with their battles for the spotlight in early television. Back then, Hollywood was a small world where actors had to go head-to-head for roles. Garner bitterly accused McQueen of playing dirty from the very start. According to Garner, McQueen sabotaged his auditions, jumped in to grab supporting parts, and never wasted a chance to steal the spotlight. Garner recalled with resentment that McQueen often shadowed him on set, studying every tiny detail and then imitating him exactly. He insisted McQueen stole everything, from pauses in dialogue meant to draw attention to gestures like tipping a hat or tapping a chest pocket. Garner scoffed. He just took what he saw and did it again, and audiences thought it was his own. Tensions peaked when McQueen deliberately squeezed Garner out of a film project, costing Garner a leading role in humiliating fashion. Garner blew up and never again held back in trashing McQueen to the press. Once colleagues, they became sworn enemies. For years, Garner branded McQueen an opportunist, willing to use any trick to grab the spotlight. The contrast between them was stark. Garner was the clean-cut leading man, charming, humorous, effortless. McQueen was rough, edgy, and rebellious, and he openly scorned Garner, calling him a soft, polished weakling. Years later, Garner still carried the grudge, bluntly writing in his memoir, "Steve always wanted the spotlight at any cost. He would stoop to anything to get it. I never liked that." McQueen, on the other hand, despised Garner to his dying day, dismissing his clean gentleman image as fake, insisting Garner was only fit for bland, forgettable roles that wasted talent in Hollywood. If James Garner was despised for accusing McQueen of stealing and playing dirty, another actor ended up in an even more twisted feud. 4. Yul Brynner, the powerful star who turned the set into his throne. In 1960, The Magnificent Seven became one of the most iconic westerns ever made. But few know that behind the legendary film was a set consumed with tension. At the time, Yul Brynner was already at the peak of fame. He had just won an Oscar for The King and I, 1956. In The Magnificent Seven, Brynner was cast as Chris and held near total power on set. Short in stature but fiercely vain, Brynner imposed bizarre rules. No one could wear darker shirts than him. No one could wear taller hats, and the camera had to ensure he appeared the tallest in every shot. But Steve McQueen, cunning and crafty, never backed down from such figures. When Brynner stood on a mound of sand, McQueen casually kicked it down to make him look shorter. When Brynner stood still, McQueen deliberately fidgeted with his gun or touched his belt. These seemingly accidental gestures worked brilliantly. Audiences' eyes shifted away from Brynner and onto McQueen. The trickery drove Brynner mad. He screamed at director John Sturges, "Get that bastard off my set." But Sturges secretly enjoyed it. McQueen's defiance gave his character Vin a spark of life that electrified the film. In the end, McQueen stayed, even as the tension between the two actors escalated. The feud only deepened. McQueen despised Brynner, branding him a dictator, selfish and obsessed with demands to maintain his glory. Brynner in turn called McQueen a spoiled brat, undisciplined and insolent. Rumor had it that Brynner even hired a personal photographer to ensure every publicity photo made him look most imposing. When McQueen found out, he mocked him endlessly, saying Brynner lived like an emperor. They hated each other so much they never spoke outside of scenes. At lunch, if Brynner sat at one table, McQueen would sit at another. After The Magnificent Seven, both swore never to work together again. Brynner told friends McQueen was the only actor who ever drove me insane on set. McQueen years later still recalled with smugness, "I was never gonna let him have that." The irony is that audiences benefited most from their feud. Thanks to McQueen constantly stealing the spotlight, the supporting role of Vin became just as memorable as Brynner's lead Chris. Some critics even said McQueen stole the film from Brynner, launching himself into A-list stardom. And Brynner wasn't the only one who paid the price. He was far from the only enemy on Steve McQueen's blacklist, because there was someone he hated even more. 5. Robert Redford hated. Even though he did nothing to McQueen. If Paul Newman was Steve McQueen's #1 enemy, then his close friend Robert Redford became the next thorn in the side of the King of Cool. The reason was obvious. Redford possessed everything McQueen longed for: iconic roles, the look of the blonde leading man, and an almost flawless personal life. In 1969, Hollywood was nurturing a historic dream: the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, with the legendary pairing of Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. It should have been the golden duo that blew up the box office. But McQueen, with his sky-high ego, threw down an ultimatum: his name must come before Newman's on the poster. Newman flatly refused. The studio would not budge. The result, McQueen walked away from the role, handing the opportunity straight to Robert Redford, then a virtual unknown. And then the unbearable happened. Butch Cassidy was a massive triumph, propelling Redford from obscurity to global superstardom. McQueen could only grit his teeth, seething with regret for having thrown away a golden chance. After missing the role, McQueen began to mention Redford with venom. He would gruffly ask friends, "Why doesn't that guy ever call me?" In McQueen's eyes, Redford was nothing but a lucky man. A nobody suddenly dropped into the empty seat he had left behind. But the truth was like a dagger twisting in McQueen's pride. Audiences adored Redford. The press hailed him as the new masculine icon, while McQueen was pigeonholed as the scruffy anti-hero. The public grouped Redford alongside Newman, calling them the perfect gentleman, elegant, romantic, moral. McQueen, by contrast, was seen as reckless, living on the edge, a rebellious icon who would never reach the purity Redford embodied. Among friends, McQueen openly sneered at Redford as a spoiled rich kid. He dismissed Redford's elegance as nothing more than a Hollywood act to sell tickets. At one point, drunk and furious, McQueen shouted Redford's nothing but a pretty boy pumped up by hype. To McQueen, Redford was the product of a system that always favored the blonde, blue-eyed man. Redford rarely retaliated, but he was well aware of McQueen's jealousy. Friends recalled that Redford felt McQueen's burning stare at events. Redford chose to avoid confrontation, but deep down, he knew that to McQueen he wasn't just a rival, he was a sworn enemy. Producers once tried to reunite McQueen and Redford in another project. McQueen shut it down the moment he heard Redford's name. He angrily declared, "Work with that guy, I'd rather quit Hollywood." The feud lasted until the very end. McQueen, though the king of cool, though still worshipped by audiences, never escaped Redford's golden shadow. In his mind, Redford was always the man who stole a chapter of history that should have been his. And Redford, he hadn't even done anything other than exist. And that existence alone was enough to drive McQueen mad, becoming the perfect target for his attacks. If Robert Redford was hated simply for daring to shine, then the next actor McQueen despised was for the complete opposite reason. 6. Gene Hackman. Scorned for lacking star aura. 1970s Hollywood produced a wave of rugged masculine stars, but few pairs were both compared so often and contrasted so sharply as Steve McQueen and Gene Hackman. In McQueen's eyes, Hackman was never worthy of being called a star. McQueen believed a true star didn't need to do much. Just standing there was enough to radiate brilliance. He once mocked in front of colleagues Hackman's, "a face you see in every supermarket." To McQueen, Hackman was just a stage laborer, technically skilled but lacking charisma and starlight. But reality didn't always align with McQueen's expectations. Hackman received constant critical acclaim, especially after the explosion of the French Connection 1971. Meanwhile, McQueen, though a box office draw, was often criticized as all style, no substance, dismissed as just a scruffy daredevil. For the proud king of cool, Hackman's praise was nothing less than a public insult to the acting style he had built his life upon. For Hackman, it was the opposite. While McQueen scorned him for lacking star power, Hackman disdained McQueen for his selfishness. During one action film, McQueen secretly shifted his position in a crowded scene, so he alone would stand in the center of the frame, pushing other actors aside. Their rivalry spilled into Hollywood events. At a 1972 party, when a producer praised Hackman as the most complete actor of the decade, McQueen stormed out muttering, "Complete my ass." In return, backstage at the Oscars, Hackman once quipped viciously, "If Steve McQueen didn't have blue eyes and a few race cars, would anyone even remember him?" The existence of one was a constant irritation to the other. McQueen never admitted Hackman had star value, and Hackman never considered McQueen a real actor. The feud with Gene Hackman showed McQueen's obsession with star aura. If Hackman enraged him by being praised too much, the next actor was despised by McQueen in a completely different way. 7. Bruce Dern, despised for playing losers. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, built his entire career on one unshakable principle: he had to be the undefeated hero of the screen. McQueen would clash with studios and colleagues to protect his stardom, But on the list of names he considered stains to be avoided, Bruce Dern ranked first. Dern wasn't a bad actor, but his filmography was littered with loser roles, villains destined to be defeated. And to McQueen, that made Dern the embodiment of failure. In Hollywood, McQueen nearly rejected any project involving Dern and bluntly declared that guy only plays losers. Sharing the screen with Dern, he believed dragged him down. Just standing near him, McQueen felt his light dim, as if it belonged only to the inferior. McQueen avoided Dern like a carrier of disease. He counted his seconds on screen-tweaked scripts, even demanded retakes if he thought a co-star outshone him. At Hollywood parties, McQueen would quietly leave when Dern entered. Paparazzi once captured McQueen sitting alone in a dark corner glaring at Dern with disdain. The irony was that while McQueen dismissed Dern as a blemish, critics praised him as an actor unafraid to tackle tragic minor characters with real depth. When a producer once suggested pairing them, McQueen exploded, "Never, not in this lifetime." Dern knew McQueen despised him. In later interviews, he said coldly, "Steve lived in fear of losing the spotlight. He never forgave anyone who brushed against his light, even in a tiny frame." It was a chilling accusation, and also the truest description of McQueen's obsession with image. In Hollywood, where the light was only enough for the strongest, McQueen refused to let the shadow of a loser like Bruce Dern touch the kingdom he had built from arrogance and obsession. If Bruce Dern was scorned as a stain for always playing losers, then the final actor on the list drove McQueen mad in an entirely different way. 8. Robert Vaughn, the pseudo-intellectual and moral lecturer. When The Magnificent Seven 1960 began filming, the cast was a gathering of future legends. But beneath the heroic cowboy atmosphere lay deep fractures of personality, especially between Steve McQueen and Robert Vaughn. This hostility stemmed from stark differences in background and philosophy. Robert Vaughn, a university graduate with a master's degree, saw himself as an intellectual in Hollywood. He analyzed scripts through political and social lenses, discussed humanistic meaning, and often liked to lecture colleagues. McQueen, by contrast, raised in poverty, hardened by the streets sent to reform school before fame, was allergic to such intellectual lecturing. To him, Vaughn was nothing but a pseudo-intellectual full of talk and theory, but lacking authenticity and raw instinct. Tensions spiked when Vaughn told the press outright that McQueen was too showy and arrogant. He hinted at McQueen's constant spotlight-stealing tricks on set, adjusting his hat, fiddling with his gun, picking up rocks, brushing his shirt, just to draw the camera even when he wasn't the focus. To Vaughn, it was cheap showboating. McQueen did not forget. From then on, he branded Vaughn a half-baked professor, mocking him behind his back as someone who talked big but acted dull. On set, McQueen deliberately ignored Vaughn, avoiding him in group scenes. Once, he even taunted him publicly. "You can read books all day, but audiences will never believe you could win a car race." The tension lasted through the shoot. To Vaughn, McQueen treated him like an amateur daring to criticize. In his memoir, Vaughn admitted they were never close, and that McQueen lived too much by instinct, too wild compared to his own intellectual persona. As for McQueen, he never hid his contempt. In private conversations, he dismissed Vaughn as a pompous lecturer, skilled at philosophy, but lacking true star quality. What McQueen hated most, Vaughn dared to say out loud what many only thought: that the king of cool was nothing more than an arrogant man addicted to the spotlight. Steve McQueen, the roots of a frighteningly extreme personality. Steve McQueen cursed co-stars, made ultimatums to studios, and rewrote scripts to ensure he had as many or more lines than rivals. At lavish parties, he would walk out simply to avoid sharing a photo with someone he deemed a competitor. So, what created a Steve McQueen who was so cool on screen yet so domineering and extreme in real life? You can't overlook his dark childhood. Born in 1930, he grew up in poverty and neglect. His father abandoned him early, his alcoholic mother repeatedly dumped him with relatives, then reclaimed him, then abandoned him again. McQueen learned young that no one would protect him. As a teen, he was sent to reform school, a place where the law of the jungle reigned. There, he learned a harsh lesson. If you're not strong, you'll be crushed. That streetwise survival instinct etched itself deep, forging a nature that was always defensive, always suspicious, always needing to win. As an adult, he carried that insecurity and fear of being dismissed straight into Hollywood. McQueen lacked the training of many peers. He didn't have the theatrical pedigree of Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman, or Al Pacino. What he had was presence, a raw cool that came from his eyes, his walk, his stunning image on a motorcycle. Audiences went wild for it. But McQueen knew the truth. His foundation was fragile. He didn't have the technique critics praised, nor the perfect gentleman aura of Paul Newman or Robert Redford. His only weapon was the spotlight. And so McQueen craved it like oxygen. He was haunted by one constant question. Are the audience still looking at me? That insecurity turned him extreme, willing to ruin a scene if a co-star looked too good, willing to fight directors for a single gesture, a single moment of attention. The 1960s, 70s were filled with macho stars with huge egos. Paul Newman, Marlon Brando, James Garner, Robert Redford, Gene Hackman, Yul Brynner. McQueen lived in an invisible arena where every glance, every role, every compliment was a battle. And McQueen, forged by the streets and reform school, decided never to stand behind anyone. He turned ordinary competition into personal survival, seeing every colleague as an enemy to crush in order to protect his crown as the one and only king of cool. McQueen's grudges were systematic, aimed at the exact weak points he envied most. With Paul Newman, he demanded script rewrites and posters split pixel for pixel. With Marlon Brando, he vowed, "I'd rather die than share the screen with that guy." With Gene Hackman, he sneered, "Just a technician, no star aura." With Bruce Dern, he rejected all projects, with him calling him a loser who would soil his undefeated image. Every peer became a thorn. Hollywood was already brutal, but to him it was like reform school all over again. Crush or be crushed forever. The cool style that made Steve McQueen famous, the cold eyes, the swagger, the half smile, was really a mask. It hid deep insecurity, fear of abandonment, fear of being forgotten, and the gnawing feeling of never being good enough. Because of that fear, McQueen showed extremity in every part of life, raging jealousy at others' praise, never forgiving anyone who touched his spotlight, nursing grudges and turning small conflicts into bottomless feuds. One director summed up McQueen perfectly. Steve didn't act to tell a story. He acted to prove he was the man who never lost. This created a world full of suspicion and loneliness. McQueen had few close friends, and even with them, he remained guarded. Wives, children, co-stars, colleagues, all could become rivals in his eyes. He constantly tested loyalty through conflict. If he felt betrayed, he cut ties forever. This created a tragic cycle. The more successful he became, the lonelier he was. The lonelier he was, the more extreme he grew. The more extreme he grew, the harder it became to hold on to real relationships. In the end, it was his extreme nature that consumed him. He had fame, money, and glory, but his personal life was a series of wrecks. 2 broken marriages, countless fleeting affairs, friendships destroyed, and an enemies list as long as Hollywood itself. In his final years facing illness, McQueen admitted to a confidant, "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was strong. But now, I just feel tired." The man once indestructible on screen turned out in reality to be just a wounded child, always afraid of abandonment, always obsessed with winning to survive. What created Steve McQueen's extreme personality? It was the deadly combination of an abandoned childhood, the insecurity of being forgotten, and a Hollywood that worshipped only winners. McQueen chose the only survival path he knew: push everyone else aside, hoard the spotlight, and despise anyone who threatened it. The King of Cool was not just an icon of swagger, but a tragic symbol of a man who never escaped the ghosts of his past. People are often captivated by Hollywood's dazzling lights, red carpet premieres, thunderous applause, and faces that seem eternally radiant under the camera. But behind that velvet curtain is a world riddled with cracks where exhaustion, insomnia, and loneliness gnaw even at stars who seem untouchable. Legends are never born from peace. They are forged in sleepless nights, in the moments when an artist looks in the mirror and feels estranged from themselves after smeared makeup and the forced smiles that hide a fractured heart. Those truths seem buried forever in sealed files and flowery tributes. But just one forgotten diary page, one slip of the tongue, and weakness can bring the entire wall of fame crashing down. And when the final mask falls, audiences are left facing a painful question: how much of the light they once adored was real, and how much was just an illusion Hollywood created to hide the abyss behind it?